You ever have one of those family members who just drains your soul? That's Aunt Valerie. She's 48, a mother of 4, and has turned mooching into a full-time lifestyle. I swear, if there's free food, free rides, or even a whiff of someone else paying the bill, she materializes like a coupon-summoning demon. Growing up, it was always something. She'd show up to birthdays with extra people and 0 gifts, borrow things and forget to return them. Once, she took my mom's Netflix password and handed it out like party favors. But the worst part? My dad never says no to her, ever. He treats her like she's the queen of the family, even when she's stomping all over everyone else's boundaries. Let me back up and give you the full picture. A few years ago, Dad and I planned this chill Friday night, just the 2 of us, going to the drive in like old times. I was really looking forward to it. Then, in a moment of catastrophic judgment, he told Valerie. That was all it took. She jokingly asked if her kids could tag along, and by the end of the day, our father-son night had turned into a full-blown carpool circus with juice boxes and loud teenagers. I should have known then, but hope makes fools out of us all. Last week, my little sister Macy passed her driver's permit test. Nothing huge, but it was her first step toward independence, and I wanted to celebrate. Just a quiet dinner at Marzano's, a cozy Italian place in town. I planned ahead, me, Dad, Macy, our older sister Lena, and our grandpa Eddie. That was it. Intimate. Simple. I even texted everyone 3 days ahead to make sure there were no mix-ups. Apparently, the only mistake I made was assuming Dad wouldn't sabotage it. We showed up at the restaurant right at 5. Oh. I told the hostess we needed a table for 5. That's when Dad casually leaned in and said, "Actually, make that 11. I blinked. 11? He smiled like he had just remembered to water the plants. Yeah, I invited Valerie and her kids. My stomach dropped. I glanced around. No sign of them yet, but my night had already been hijacked. I took a deep breath, trying not to explode in the middle of a public place. Why didn't you tell me? He shrugged. Thought it'd be nice for everyone to be together. Sure, because everyone loves surprise guests when they're footing the bill for half the table. Valerie strolled in 30 minutes late like she was arriving at a red carpet gala. Her kids, ranging from age 10 to 19, shuffled behind her like an unpaid entourage. She greeted everyone like she was the guest of honor, hugging, laughing, soaking in attention. I stayed silent, focused on Macy. This night is about her, I reminded myself. Don't let Valerie ruin it. But Valerie? Valerie has this energy, the kind that fills a room whether you invite it or not. Before I knew it, she was flipping through the menu like she'd just hit a jackpot. Her kids followed her lead, ordering appetizers, sodas, even desserts before the entrees had hit the table. No restraint, no shame, just pure, entitled confidence. And in the back of my mind, a little alarm started ringing. Something's not right here. Dinner went on. Conversation flowed, mostly awkward. Valerie dominated the table with stories that somehow always circled back to her and her struggles. And then, right as dessert plates were being cleared, the check landed with a quiet thud in the middle of the table. I reached for it, already planning to split the bill between myself, Dad, and maybe Grandpa Eddie. We had eaten modestly. I figured $60, max. Then came the moment. Valerie, sipping the last of her third cherry soda, leaned in with a faux confused smile. Wait, I thought you were covering us? The words hit like a slap. I blinked. What? You know, she said, twirling her straw. Since you planned it and all. I froze. My brain tried to process the sheer audacity of her assumption. I didn't invite her. I didn't ask for her kids to show up. I didn't even know she was coming. I looked at Dad, waiting for him to correct her. To say, of course not, I invited you, I'll pay. Instead, he sighed and said, I mean, it wouldn't hurt to treat them. It's just dinner. No? Nope. Absolutely not. They weren't on my invite list, I said, my voice calm but stone cold. And I never said I'd pay for them. Valerie blinked, stunned. You're seriously going to make me pay for my own kids? Yeah, I said, I am. Her face twisted. She looked personally offended, like I'd just canceled Christmas. Grandpa stayed silent, stabbing at his leftover lasagna like it was Switzerland. Lena just sipped her water and avoided eye contact. Dad? He leaned back, rubbing his temple like I had just made his life hard. You're being a little dramatic, don't you think? I ignored him and asked the waitress to split the bill. Total for my side of the table, $41.60. Valerie's table, $256.87. I paid my share, left a tip, and stood up. Unbelievable, Valerie muttered. I guess some people just don't value family. I didn't reply. I just looked at Macy and said, You did great on your test. Proud of you, and walked out. That should have been the end. But of course, with Valerie, that was just the beginning. You'd think after that dinner, after making it crystal clear I wasn't footing the bill for a crowd, I didn't invite that Valerie would take the hint, maybe even feel a little embarrassed. But nah, that would require shame, something she's clearly immune to. Instead, she doubled down. For the first couple of weeks, I thought, maybe, just maybe, this would blow over. Families have awkward moments. People cool off. Life moves on. That's what should have happened. But this is Valerie we're talking about. She didn't just hold a grudge, she curated it, polished it, wore it like a designer handbag. It started small, snide comments, passive-aggressive one-liners at family gatherings. She'd glance at me and say things like, well, some of us don't believe in generosity. Or she'd dramatically tell her youngest sweetheart, we can't afford that, not everyone helps out like family should. Always vague, just indirect enough to not seem like an outright attack, but clear enough that everyone in the room knew who she was talking about. And my dad? Silent. Every single time. I asked him once why he never said anything. His response? She's just being dramatic. Let it go. Easy for him to say. He's not the one being painted as some heartless villain because he refused to buy a dozen breadsticks for freeloaders. The real turning point happened at my cousin's birthday party. Backyard BBQ, nothing fancy. I brought chips. Valerie brought her drama. She cornered my sister Lena by the cooler and said, I just don't understand how someone could spend so much on themselves and not offer to help family. Must be nice. Lena, bless her heart, tried to play diplomat. He didn't do anything wrong, Valerie. You just assumed he'd cover it. Valerie gasped like she'd been physically struck. Assumed? I've never assumed anything in my life. Which is hilarious because that woman walks through life assuming the world owes her buffet privileges. Then came the piece de resistance, the 4th of July cookout at my grandpa's. I was grabbing a soda when I overheard Valerie talking loudly to my great-aunt Doris. Yeah, she said, shaking her head. Some people don't understand what it means to be part of a family. They'll leave a single mother struggling at a restaurant just to prove a point. Can you imagine? I wanted to scream, but instead I cracked open my soda and walked right past her without saying a word. She smiled at me. That smug little smirk like she knew exactly what she was doing. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. She wasn't hurt. She wasn't wounded. She was playing the role of the victim because it gave her attention, sympathy, leverage. My sister Macy started to notice too. She came to me one night, fidgeting with her hoodie sleeve, and said, I know she's being unfair, but could you maybe just say sorry, just to get her to stop? That one stung. Macy's not dramatic. She avoids conflict like it's the plague. And if she was bringing it up, it meant Valerie's campaign was actually working. I told her, apologizing would just validate her behavior. I can't reward manipulation, Macy. That's not how this works. She nodded, but I could tell she didn't feel any better. Things came to a head at Grandpa Eddie's birthday dinner a few weeks later. He picked Applebee's simple, casual, no drama. At least, that was the plan. Before we even sat down, I told Dad again firmly, I'm not paying for Valerie. I'm not covering a single onion ring that isn't mine. He nodded. Got it. We walked in. And who's already there, waving like she's royalty? Valerie, in her usual spot at the head of the table like she's hosting the damn thing. Her kids were already mid-order by the time we sat down. Fancy drinks, appetizers, the works. Like they'd just escaped a deserted island and stumbled into civilization. I stayed quiet, kept my head down, focused on Grandpa, who looked genuinely happy to have everyone together. But the whole time, I could feel Valerie watching me, waiting. She thrives off this tension, like it's her favorite form of entertainment. The bill arrived, and right on cue, She launched into Act 3 of her entitled opera. "Oh," she said sweetly. "Are we doing the split bill thing again?" I didn't even flinch. "Yes, we are." Her smile faltered just a bit. "Still holding on to that bitterness, huh?" "No," I said, setting down my card. "Just holding on to my wallet." Dad let out one of those tired sighs, rubbing his temple like he had a migraine that only my boundaries could cause. Maybe just make a gesture of goodwill? A gesture of goodwill. The same man who had invited her to dinner after dinner without asking me was now suggesting I should be the peacemaker? I said nothing. I paid for myself, stood up, and left. Behind me, I heard Valerie mutter something about family never meaning anything to some people. Let her mutter. That night, I made a decision. No more group dinners. No more last-minute ambushes where I'm expected to shell out cash just to avoid being villainized. If food's involved and Valerie might show up, I'm out. I told Dad, told Lena, told Macy, no more. They understood even if they didn't love it. And for a while, it worked. I avoided every dinner, every brunch, every family potluck that felt suspiciously like a fundraiser for Valerie's pantry. But peace never lasts long when you're dealing with a professional leech. Because then came Lena's graduation dinner. And against my better judgment, I said yes. Lena was always the peacekeeper. If there was tension, she'd smooth it out. If someone raised their voice, she lowered hers. And when Valerie turned family dinners into emotional hostage situations, Lena still tried to see the best in her. She'd say things like, "Maybe she's just overwhelmed," or "She doesn't mean it that way." So when Lena called me and said, "Please come to my graduation dinner. It's important," I hesitated. I wanted to be there for her, I did. But I'd made myself a promise. If there's food and a whiff of Valerie, I'm out. Lena swore it'd be different this time. Said she'd spoken to Dad. Said Valerie wasn't even invited. "This is about me," she insisted. "I'm not letting her hijack it." I wanted to believe her. So I said yes. Texas Roadhouse, 6:00 p.m. I showed up on time, dressed decent, gift in hand, and hope cautiously tucked under my sleeve. And then I saw her. Valerie, already seated, not just seated enthroned, laughing, sipping from one of those giant lemonade mason jars like she owned the damn table. Her kids were flipping through menus like they'd been handed the royal banquet scroll. My stomach sank. She was early, which never happens. Valerie is chronically late to everything. The fact that she was already there meant one thing: this was planned. I caught Lena's eyes as I walked over. She looked apologetic, but also cornered, like someone who made a deal and was now realizing the cost. Valerie smiled as I sat. "Oh, hey there. So glad you could make it." I didn't respond. I just pulled out my chair, nodded at Grandpa, and said hi to Macy. Valerie's kids were already in full celebration mode, loud, laughing, ordering appetizers like appetizers were the main event. Then Valerie started her usual act. "You have to try the ribeye here," she told her son, loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. "It's only $28, but it's totally worth it." She turned to her daughter. "And you can add shrimp for $5, baby. Get the works." "It's a celebration." I stayed quiet. This wasn't new. It was just louder now, more confident. She wasn't even pretending to be subtle anymore. She leaned toward me at one point and said, "You'll love the loaded sweet potato. They make it with cinnamon butter and oh wait, are you still mad about that?" That, as in the time she tried to trick me into paying for 6 extra meals. That, as in the nonstop smear campaign she launched afterward. That, as in the gaslighting, the guilt trips, the manipulation. I looked at her, smiled. Nope, not mad. Just observant. She blinked, tilted her head. Just noticing patterns," I said. "Nothing new." She laughed like I was joking. I wasn't. Dinner went on. Valerie kept hyping up the menu like she was sponsored. Her kids were halfway through their second round of lemonades before the entrees even arrived. I stuck to the basics. 1 dish, 1 drink, no refills, no extras. When the check finally came, it felt like someone had dropped a grenade in the center of the table. Everyone froze. The waitress placed the leather bill folder gently, like she didn't want to disturb a sleeping bear. She looked around and said, "All together or separate?" Before I could speak, Valerie piped up, "Oh, we're all together, right?" She didn't even look at me when she said it. just stared straight ahead, like the decision had already been made. I turned to the waitress. "Separate, please." Valerie whipped around, full offense mode engaged. "Seriously? Again?" I didn't even blink. "Yep, again," she scoffed. "Wow. Guess some grudges die hard." "Not a grudge," I said calmly. "Just a boundary." Dad sighed. "There it is," I thought. "Cue the guilt trip." "You know," he muttered, "this is getting old." I looked at him. "It sure is." He rubbed his temples like I was giving him a migraine, even though he was the one who invited her again. The waitress returned with the split bill totals. Mine, $27.45. Valerie and her kids, $189.32. She stared at the numbers like they'd personally insulted her. "Well," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "it would have been nice if someone had offered. Especially after everything we've been through, and that's when I broke. Not angrily, not dramatically. I just laughed. A real, honest laugh." Everyone turned. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "Valerie, what exactly have you been through? Having to pay for your own food like the rest of us?" She stared at me, stunned, like no one had ever called her out so directly before. I continued, "You know what's funny? Every time we eat together, you suddenly forget how restaurants work. You order like you're feeding a film crew and then act shocked when the check shows up. It's impressive, honestly." She blinked, stunned into silence. For a second, I thought Dad might say something, defend her, guilt me. But instead, he just stayed quiet. Lena, meanwhile, let out the tiniest snort and looked away, pretending to sip her drink. The waitress, probably sensing the rising tension, quickly collected cards. I paid my part, stood up, and nodded at Lena. "Congrats again," I said. "Proud of you." Then I walked out. Outside, the air felt lighter. I took a breath, sat on the curb, waited for the tension to cool off before heading home. Macy came out a few minutes later. She sat beside me, quiet for a while, then said, "I know she's family, but I think you're right, that meant a lot. Because for a long time, I'd felt like the crazy one. Like I was the one making a big deal out of nothing. But hearing it from Macy, my quiet, conflict-avoiding little sister, made me realize I wasn't the only one seeing it. Valerie had turned family dinners into a game, a performance. And I wasn't playing anymore. I didn't know it yet, but this night marked a shift. Because the next time I saw Valerie, she brought a guest I never expected. After the Texas Roadhouse debacle, I told myself that was the last time. No more family dinners if Valerie might show up. No more splitting checks that feel more like emotional ransom notes. No more letting my boundaries get turned into punchlines. And for a while, I stuck to it. Declined invitations. Opted out of gatherings. Spent holidays with friends instead of stress-eating breadsticks, while Valerie monologued about how tough her life was in the exact same tone people use to humble brag on Facebook. But then Dad's birthday came around. It was a milestone, his 60th. The big 6-0. Lena called me up, trying to keep the peace as usual. "I know things have been tense," she said gently. "But it's Dad's birthday. He really wants you there, just dinner. Low-key, no drama." "Is Valerie coming?" I asked, straight to the point. She hesitated. "He said it's just immediate family." "Did he say she's not coming?" Another pause. "Then he said it's not about her." Which is classic Dad. Skirt the issue, talk around it. Hope the problem just dissolves in a cloud of mashed potatoes and denial. Still, I missed him. Missed laughing with my siblings. Missed the version of family that existed before Valerie started treating every meal like a personal GoFundMe. So I gave in. Told myself I could handle one dinner. Just one. The place? Cheesecake Factory. And the moment I walked in, I knew I'd made a mistake. There were too many chairs. Not drastically so, just enough to make your stomach drop. I counted. 10. Should have been 7. I didn't say anything. Just sat down. Waited. 5 minutes later, she walked in. Valerie. Not just with her kids this time. Oh no. Tonight, she had a +1. A man I'd never seen before. Mid-40s, shaved head, sunglasses on indoors, chewing gum like it owed him money. She walked in like she owned the place, smiling, waving, like this was her celebration. And the guy? He looked around like he wasn't sure if this was a date or a buffet. I turned to Dad. "Seriously?" He didn't look at me, just said, Let's not make a scene. Right, because I'm the problem here. Valerie slid into her seat like she was sliding into a hot tub. Comfortable, confident, already chatting with the waitress before we'd even opened our menus. "This is Todd," she announced. "He's been such a rock for me lately. Thought it'd be nice for him to meet the family." Nobody asked her why she thought it was okay to bring him. Nobody asked her why she assumed this dinner was open invite. We all just stared at our menus like we were trying to decode ancient hieroglyphics. The tension was unreal. I didn't even open my menu. I already knew what I wanted. A small dish, something simple, something I could finish and walk out on if needed. Valerie, meanwhile, was orchestrating a meal like a wedding planner, encouraging her kids to treat themselves, nudging Todd to get the sampler. He did. And 2 cocktails. Non-alcoholic, sure, but still overpriced sugar water. I sat there thinking, there's no way she expects me to pay for this. Not again. Not with this guy. But I also knew Valerie, and she only brought a guest when she thought there'd be a free ride waiting at the end. Dinner dragged on. I barely spoke. Dad mostly sat in silence, occasionally chiming in with a tired "pass the butter" or "that's nice." Lena looked like she wanted to sink into the floor. Macy stayed glued to her phone. Then came the check. The waitress placed it gently in the center of the table and gave us all the same look. You give a group of kids about to fight over the last slice of cake. Valerie picked it up, made a show of reading the total. Her eyebrows rose. "Oh, wow. That added up fast." Then she turned to me. "You probably want to make up for last time, right?" Dead silence. I stared at her. Then at Dad. Then back at her. "You brought a stranger to a family dinner," I said quietly. "And now you're asking me to pay?" She blinked. "He's not a stranger. He's support." I almost laughed. "You didn't even tell anyone he was coming," she huffed. "So now we're policing who gets to celebrate a birthday? Real nice." I looked at Dad again. This was his moment. His chance to finally step up, say something, shut it down. He sighed, like usual, but then he surprised me. For the first time ever, he looked directly at her and said, "Maybe you should pay for yourself." For once. Valerie froze. She opened her mouth, closed it, blinked. Even Todd looked confused, like he wasn't sure if the free food was still happening. I couldn't believe it. After all these years, all those dinners, all those sideways glances and spineless shrugs, Dad finally said something. She tried to recover, mumbled something about not bringing enough, glanced at Todd like maybe he'd bail her out. He didn't. He just sat there, suddenly very interested in the drink menu. Valerie looked around the table, waiting for anyone to jump in, to offer, to save her. No one moved. Even Grandpa, who usually avoids conflict like it's contagious, pulled out his wallet, paid for himself, and stood up without a word. One by one, we followed. Macy, Lena, me. No speeches, no drama. Just quiet, calm exits. Valerie was left sitting at the table with a man she barely knew, a stack of plates, and a bill she hadn't budgeted for. That was the moment the spell broke. The moment she realized the game was over. She didn't say a word as we walked out. Didn't yell. Didn't guilt. She just sat there, silenced not by confrontation, but by the absence of rescue. And Dad? As we reached the parking lot, he muttered under his breath, "This is getting ridiculous." That's when I knew he'd finally had enough. It took years, countless dinners, a mountain of manipulation. But Valerie had finally burned through her last bridge, and she didn't even realize it yet. After the Cheesecake Factory dinner, things got quiet. No dramatic texts, no cryptic social media posts, no phone calls from extended relatives asking why I'd publicly humiliated Valerie. Just silence. And if you know Valerie, you'd know that silence wasn't peace. It was a storm gathering, because someone like her doesn't let go. She doesn't forget. She doesn't move on. She waits. Builds her next performance. Plans the next ambush. Because manipulation? It's not a reaction for her. It's strategy. So when I heard that we'd be having a family lunch to celebrate Grandpa Eddie's retirement, I knew it. I felt it deep in my gut. This wasn't just a meal, it was a setup. Still, I didn't want to back out. Grandpa was retiring after 4 decades as a pipe fitter. He deserved a real send-off. And frankly, I didn't want Valerie to be the only voice at that table. Lena texted me a few days before the lunch. Valerie says she's not bringing anyone this time, she wrote. Then she added, but I don't trust her. Neither did I. Dad didn't say much. Just told me the lunch was happening at that bistro downtown with the outdoor patio. Nice and casual, he said. I showed up early. I wanted to sit near Grandpa. Keep things focused on him, not the sideshow Valerie always brings. The table was already set when I arrived. 10 seats. Too many. Again. Lena showed up a few minutes later, scanned the table, and muttered, I knew it. We didn't have to wait long. Valerie rolled in right on time, which, again, was suspicious all on its own. She had her kids with her, of course, but this time she had a baby stroller. I blinked. She wasn't holding it like a babysitter, she was parading it. Smiling, slow walking, like she was revealing some grand prize on a game show. Lena leaned in. Did she borrow a baby? The stroller stopped beside our table. Inside, a baby, maybe 6 months old, bundled up like it was midwinter. Valerie beamed. This is little Beau. He's my boyfriend Todd's nephew. We're watching him for the weekend. She said it like she was offering us a slice of cake. Like this was a fun surprise, not a totally bizarre twist in her never-ending quest for attention. Nobody responded. She sat down, laid the baby bag across an extra chair, pulled out bottles and toys. Her kids grabbed menus like it was routine. It was obvious this wasn't a favor. This was theater. She was using a baby, someone else's baby, as a prop in her act. Dinner went downhill fast. Grandpa tried to keep the mood light, telling old work stories, asking people about their plans. But Valerie kept cutting in, complaining about sleep schedules, formula prices, how expensive it is to raise kids nowadays, all while bouncing Beau on her knee like she was auditioning for Mother of the Year. And then, in true Valerie fashion, she pivoted. I just think it's wild how some people in this family have so much and don't even offer to help with basic things, like groceries, or gas, or meals. She didn't say my name. She didn't have to. I didn't bite. I just buttered my roll and stared at the table. But Grandpa? He put down his fork and said, Valerie, today's not about you. Her smile twitched. She played innocent. I'm just saying it'd be nice if everyone chipped in once in a while. Macy, usually silent, jumped in. No one asked you to bring 6 people and a baby to a retirement lunch. Valerie blinked, caught off guard. Wow. Didn't realize generosity was optional now. Dad cleared his throat. Valerie. It wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, but it had weight. She turned, surprised. He continued, We're not doing this again. She laughed, bitter. Doing what exactly? Existing? No, he said calmly, turning every family event into a fundraiser. You could have heard a pin drop. For years he'd dodged, deflected, defended her even when she was clearly in the wrong. But now, he was done. She tried to play the victim. You think I'm just using people? I know you are, he said. And I'm tired of covering for it. Her face went red. So what? Now I'm the villain? I looked her dead in the eye. You made yourself the villain. She stood, still holding the baby, like she expected anyone to stand with her. No one did. Not Lena. Not Dad. Not Grandpa. Not even her kids, who looked more interested in their fries than the scene unfolding. She scoffed, muttered something about disrespect, and stormed off, stroller wheels squeaking behind her like a squeaky little exclamation point. And just like that, she was gone. No one chased her. We stayed, ate in peace. For the first time in years, there was no tension, no manipulation, just family, real family. Macy leaned over at one point and whispered, Do you think she'll come to the next thing? I shook my head. Not unless someone invites her. Dad nodded, and no one will. That was the last straw, the final act. Valerie's desperate attempt to guilt us with a borrowed baby blew up in her face because people finally saw through it. She'd pushed too hard, too often. And now, she had no audience left. After the retirement lunch, something shifted. Not just in me, but in everyone. For the first time, Valerie's tricks didn't land. Her dramatics fell flat. Her usual audience, Dad, Grandpa, even the cousins had stopped clapping. It felt surreal. Like we'd finally cut the strings on a puppet show we didn't realize we were part of. She stopped showing up for a while after that. No more surprise appearances. No more last-minute tag-alongs. It was like someone unplugged the Valerie broadcast. And honestly, I didn't miss it. None of us did. But I also knew her. Knew that silence was rarely surrender, it was strategy. Sure enough, a month later, she made one final attempt to claw her way back into the spotlight. It started with a family group chat message of all things. Valerie, hey everyone! Thinking we should have a little family reset dinner. No drama, just love. Let's heal, Lena responded first. We're good, thanks. Then Macy, respectfully, no thanks. We like the peace. Even Grandpa replied with a simple, hard pass. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The message sat there unanswered after that. She sent a few more emojis, a quote about forgiveness. Then, silence. That was the end of her campaign. She finally understood her seat at the table wasn't taken away. She burned it. After that, we started having normal dinners again. Actual, relaxed, pleasant meals. No surprise guests. No tension bubbling under the surface. No giant bills followed by guilt trips disguised as family values. One Saturday, Lena hosted a backyard pizza night. Just close family. I showed up, expecting the usual awkward edge that had always come with gatherings. But it wasn't there. Instead, people were laughing, eating without eyeing the check. Macy played music from her phone. Grandpa dozed off in the lawn chair like an old dog sunbathing. At one point, Dad came over to where I was standing near the grill. He handed me a soda, leaned on the railing, and said, I didn't realize how heavy it was. Until it was gone. He didn't say her name. He didn't have to. I nodded. It was like dragging dead weight through every meal. He looked away for a second, then back. I should have stepped in earlier. Yeah, I said, but you did eventually, and I meant it. We'd had enough tension to fill 10 Thanksgivings. But that moment, that quiet honesty, it felt like closure, like an old house finally getting aired out. We didn't talk about her after that, not really. She became more of a footnote than a figure. Occasionally someone would say, remember the Cheesecake Factory thing? And we'd laugh, shake our heads, then move on. The most surprising part? Her kids, especially the older ones, started showing up on their own. Without her, turns out when they weren't stuck playing supporting roles in her productions, they were actually decent to be around. Polite, funny. One of them, Jordan, even apologized to me. Didn't realize how bad it was, he said one night at Lena's. Until I stepped back, it always felt normal. I told him it wasn't his fault. Because it wasn't. Valerie had been working that script for years. And when someone grows up in the middle of a performance, the stage lights feel like sunlight. You don't question the setup, you just survive it. Eventually, Valerie stopped trying to reach out altogether. The family finally held the line. There were no more debates about who was being too harsh or making a big deal out of nothing. Everyone saw it now, the manipulation, the freeloading, the emotional blackmail dressed up as togetherness. No one wanted that back, not even Dad. The final proof came on Thanksgiving. The invite list was small, just immediate family, Grandpa, and a couple cousins. We cooked together, played cards, watched old movies, and for the first time in years, no one was walking on eggshells. As we sat down to eat, Macy raised her glass and said, "To peace and mashed potatoes." Everyone laughed. We toasted. We dug in. Halfway through the meal, Dad looked around and said, "This feels like what family's supposed to feel like." And just like that, I realized something. It had never really been about money. Not the $300 set Olive Garden. Not the appetizers and cocktails and extra chairs. It was about respect. Valerie didn't just expect us to pay. She expected us to stay silent while she took, and took, and took. And when we finally didn't, when we drew a line, she called it betrayal. But standing up for yourself isn't betrayal. Setting boundaries isn't cruelty. Saying no to manipulation doesn't make you heartless, it makes you healthy. That's what I wish more people understood. Sometimes the villain in your story isn't a stranger. Sometimes they share your blood, your name, your memories. But that doesn't mean you owe them endless chances. Sometimes loving your family means loving yourself enough to say enough. And when you finally do, that's when peace shows up. Not loudly, not with fanfare, just quietly, with a plate of food, a full heart, and no one asking you to pay for anyone but yourself. It's been about a year now. Valerie still lives in town, but she's faded into the background. We hear bits and pieces she joined a new church, tried to start a side hustle selling essential oils, maybe even tried to rope her new friend group into family-style dinners. But none of it stuck, because her tricks only worked on people too polite or too scared to say no, and we're not those people anymore. If you're still wondering if I was the jerk for not paying that $300 back, then I get it. It's easy to hear family and think obligation. But trust me, sometimes the kindest thing you can do is stop enabling someone, even if they hate you for it, especially then. Because love without boundaries isn't love, it's submission. And that's not something I'm interested in serving with my spaghetti. Story 2I, because I no longer allow my roommate to steal my food. She consumes every morsel. I thus decided how I would handle it. I'm a 22-year-old woman who shares a 2-bedroom apartment with my 23-year-old roommate. It has been less than a year since we moved in together. Everything appeared to be all right at first. I honestly believed it would be a nice arrangement since we got along well enough, had comparable schedules, were both somewhat clean, and even had some interests. But as time went on, I began to notice something strange. Meal planning is something I do religiously. I don't always have time to cook every day because I work long hours. I thus spend a few hours on Sundays organizing and preparing my meals for the next week. In addition to making sure I'm getting a good nutritional balance and spending money on fresh foods, I genuinely like it. It's healing in a way. I'll divide everything into containers with labels, store them in the refrigerator in an orderly fashion, and then go with my week. I didn't give it much thought at first. When 1 or 2 containers disappeared, perhaps I had numbered incorrectly, or perhaps I had forgotten that I had eaten one sooner than intended. Then, however, it began to occur more regularly. I would go have lunch so I could finish my task. The meal I had been anticipating all day disappeared. I purchased snacks in case I needed a quick fix in between meals, inexplicably absent as well. I started to see that it went beyond simple forgetfulness or misplacing something. There is just one other individual residing in the flat, and someone was consuming my meals. So I went up to her. I wasn't hostile or impolite. I just asked her whether she had eaten my food. With a casual demeanor, she dismissed it, stating things like, "Oh, I was hungry," or "I meant to replace it, but I forgot." Or worse, I thought it didn't matter. "It's actually sort of a huge issue," I informed her. To make sure I had enough food for the week, I invested time, money, and energy. I was forced to spend more money or go hungry since she took it. I hadn't planned for it. She said she would stop and replace whatever she took. She never replaced anything. Spoiler warning. I made an effort to be understanding. I began writing more specific labels on my containers, such as "Do not eat." I own this. She was not deterred by that. I began to conceal nibbles in my room. She continued to help herself to items in the refrigerator that were obviously mine. Living with a toddler who didn't understand limits was like that. The final straw was when she took all of my prepared chicken for the week. 4 dinners worth, which was the last straw. I made the decision that enough was enough. I purposely just purchased enough food for myself when I went grocery shopping. I didn't receive any additional milk, bread, cereal, pasta, or other common household necessities. Usually we both helped out. I was sick of being the only one who bought food and had them go without even a thank you, so I just grabbed what I needed for my meals. She was sitting on the couch when I returned from the grocery, and she watched me unpack my things. "Oh, what did you get?" she inquired casually. I also lightly said a few things to her. Her expression transformed in an instant. She asked, looking somewhat disbelieving and irritated, "Whoa, you can't even share a small amount, and I've been having financial difficulties." I responded, "I have been sharing while attempting to maintain my composure. You simply never inquire. You simply take. There is a distinction." After that, she remained silent. She simply rolled her eyes, sneered, and hurried into her room. She has been acting really passive-aggressively ever since. She knows that slamming cupboards and leaving small messes about the flat will irritate me. When she passes me and the cherry on top, she whispers something beneath her breath. She accused me of being cold and self-centered for not supporting her in front of some of our common acquaintances. while she's experiencing financial difficulties. Most of the individuals who are DMing me right now are men. She is more comfortable saying things like, "Come on, give her a break." You're not really letting her starve, are you? She's going through it. One of them even stated that I would support her if I lived with her. You live with her and pay for her groceries. Like, okay, what about that? I'd rather not be mean. I know what it's like to struggle financially. I've been there. I'm not wealthy. In order to avoid wasting money or having to order takeout, I meticulously plan out my meals and stick to my budget. Considering how frequently she has just stolen stuff without consent or recognition, I have been more than generous. Would she have approached me and asked if I may eat some of your food, since I'm so low on money this week? She never asked, but I would have said yes. She simply continued to assist herself. When I eventually put my foot down, they became defensive. It didn't seem like a huge problem to me. I didn't shout. I didn't make a public post about it. I just made the decision to cut off communication with someone who obviously didn't respect limits. It seems that I am now the antagonist in her tale. So, yes, I feel a little guilty now. I hate being painted as a cold-hearted roommate when all I did was defend my personal space, time, and finances, not because I believe I did anything wrong. However, I'm also incredibly irritated that no one seems to care that I was the victim of exploitation. That empty shells were waiting for me when I got home. I paid to have the impression that I was a bad person for establishing boundaries, after being walked all over for months. Tell me then, am I the jerk? One update. Hello once more. I therefore didn't anticipate returning with another update, but here we are. Because apparently Ashley arrives with a shovel just when I think things have reached their lowest point. I felt a little lighter after writing my first post and letting everything out. I kept everything apart, just like I promised to. I moved all of my groceries, leftovers, sauces, and condiments to their own shelf in the pantry and refrigerator. Everything, including my peanut butter jar and bottle of soy sauce, had clear labels. After our mutuals called her selfish and called out the passive-aggressive tension, I hoped she would finally understand and respect my boundaries. But no, she didn't. Within days, I started noticing things missing again. Not whole meals this time, but little things which felt even more infuriating in a way. A protein bar gone here, a yogurt missing there. Then I noticed that some of my leftovers had clearly been tampered with. One night I packed up this lemon garlic salmon I had made, which was not cheap to prepare with roasted potatoes and asparagus. I had portioned it out into 2 meals, and when I went to grab one for dinner, it had clearly been scraped into and rearranged to look untouched. The audacity. I confronted her again, but she swore up and down she hadn't touched anything. Same old lines. She was gaslighting me at this point, and I knew it. So I decided if she wasn't going to learn from being told no, if being reasonable and polite and firm didn't work, I would get a little creative. I'm not proud of it. I don't think this makes me a saint, but I was done being walked on. So I made a small batch of brownies for myself. Nothing fancy, just a small treat to help me through the end of a tough week. I cooked them perfectly, cut them into clean squares, and placed them in a jar labeled properly with my name. I placed them directly in the center of my shelf, knowing full well what would happen. Here's the deal. I had added a very modest but efficient dosage of over-the-counter laxatives. Not risky, nothing excessive, just enough to act as a bodily reminder that stealing food that doesn't belong to you might have consequences. The packaging even gave explicit recommendations on dosage, and I kept far below anything excessive. These weren't weaponized brownies. They were, in every meaning of the term, a warning. The next morning, I woke up to discover half the brownies gone. I wasn't surprised. Later that day, I heard the restroom door open and close more times than I could count. Ashley seemed to be caught in a terrible cycle as she shuffled back and forth between her room and the restroom. She was continuously and loudly complaining about how sick her stomach felt, how she was unaware of what she had consumed to get this, how the previous evening she hadn't even left the house. I maintained a neutral expression. I spoke in a calm tone. I told her, but I didn't brag. Later that evening, when she was curled up on the couch looking wretched, she suggested that it could be wise to inquire before consuming food that isn't hers. particularly if she is unsure of its contents. She became pale. Her eyes widened. When she finally put everything together, I could see it. She tightened her jaw. Her entire body tensed. Then the tirade ensued. "I tried to poison her," she said, referred to me as crazy, claimed that I had gone too far and that I was a spiteful, wicked person. I informed her quite frankly that it was in food that was clearly marked as mine and that it was an over-the-counter laxative at a safe, suitable quantity. I informed her that I would have advised her not to consume it if she had inquired before doing so. However, she never asks, so she didn't. Her go-to dramatic exit tactic has been storming off to her room and slamming the door. Now, I could hear her pacing while she spoke on the phone, most likely raving about how terrible I am. The problem is that she appeared ashamed, not just humiliated, but enraged. As if for the first time, she understood that her actions had genuine repercussions that she was powerless to influence, change, or control. Additionally, she didn't touch anything of mine for a whole week. Not a snack. No juice. There aren't any leftovers. She began writing her own name on her belongings, stayed to her side of the refrigerator, and even went grocery shopping by herself for a full 7 days. It felt as if you were living with someone completely different. Silence that is passive-aggressive? Indeed. Muttering and glares. Of course, but grabbing my meal. She stopped handling my belongings for a week, yet she never once labeled me nasty. The second update. I really wish I were here with a dull resolution, or at least a peaceful fade out. However, the matter worsened because it naturally did. Let's call this new boyfriend of Ashley's Tyler. Just for context, the name should tell you everything. When I confronted Ashley for the first time and she began distributing her version of events around our common social networks, he was one of the people who messaged me back. Through SMS and direct messages, several of our mutuals began to contribute without being asked. Among them was Tyler. He wrote me a pretty patronizing message saying that I was being branded insensitive and that I should simply be understanding as she was obviously going through a difficult moment. He talked so confidently, as though he knew every detail, as though he had lived in the flat and saw the entire event, that I recall reading it with a hollow sensation of incredulity. He didn't. He was aware of her version of events, the one where I was this avaricious, vindictive roommate hoarding food, while she crept about with her heart crushed and her stomach empty, too shy and humiliated to ask for anything. The sort of pathetic tale that evokes pity when you exclude any references to entitlement and thievery. It didn't surprise me to learn later that he was the new boyfriend, but I chose to ignore him at the time since, to be honest, I had more important stuff to handle. It seemed inevitable. She was now completely enmeshed with the man who had previously sided with her without knowing anything. He had already performed the night in text form, sitting in the center of my area as if it were his. He was now in my kitchen with his feet up. It reached a boiling point last Thursday. On one of those days, you could almost feel your blood pressure increasing with each hour that went by. I prepared for it in advance. At home, a substantial lunch was waiting for me. This chicken stir-fry, which I cook with jasmine rice, vibrant sautéed vegetables, and homemade soy ginger sauce, is my go-to comfort food after a difficult day. On Sunday, I prepared 3 meals, labeled them, dated them, and arranged them nicely on my refrigerator shelf. It was supposed to be dinner that evening, and I had one left. As soon as I entered the flat, I sensed a strange silence that wasn't calm, but rather unnatural. Ashley and Tyler were standing next to one other at the counter, laughing about something, eating casually as if they were in their own little restaurant. When I turned the corner into the kitchen, in front of them, my containers were open. Stir-fried food was scooped onto plates. Already, half of it is gone. The lids, sitting off to the side like abandoned evidence, still had my name written on them. I felt as though I had entered someone else's life, which was unreal. When they noticed me, they continued. They hardly batted an eye. Totally unconcerned, Tyler looked up and continued eating, as if I weren't standing there, witnessing my meticulously prepared dinners being eaten by someone who didn't live there and had never even put $1 toward the shopping bill. I asked Ashley something about the sauce. It seemed like a power move all around, as if he wanted to test if I would really call him out on it, even though he knew he was going too far. When I finally inquired what they were doing, Tyler gave me a languid, smug, lazy grin that made my skin crawl. "Relax, it's just food," he muttered. I stood there in shock. Only food. It was a slap of words. The total disregard for my money, time, and effort. As if I were crazy for giving a damn about something that had been taken from me time and time again. I told him to go. No rage, shouting, or haggling, just a firm, unambiguous command to leave my personal space. He stopped as if he was assessing me, then gave Ashley a look that said, "She's kidding, right?" She wasn't. No, I wasn't. I informed Ashley that there would be no more justifications or comprehensions after this. This was the last time the line had been crossed. At last, dragging his feet as if being asked to go were beneath him, he departed. He said something I couldn't quite make out as he left, but it was obviously mocking. As if I were the one causing the drama, Ashley remained silent. Nothing. As though I had been the inconvenience in a scenario where they had raided my food like raccoons in a pantry. She rolled her eyes and withdrew to her room, seemingly irritated by the interruption of her evening. I purchased a small refrigerator the following day. It's also not one of those cheap little dorm refrigerators. A sturdy mid-sized one that could accommodate snacks and beverages in addition to a week's worth of groceries. Although it was an investment, I would have been willing to pay twice as much for a brief moment of peace at that time. I unpacked it, carried it into my room by myself, and placed it against the wall next to my desk. I transferred all of my food, including prepared meals, fruits, sauces, and small indulgences like almond butter and oat milk. It all ended up in that refrigerator. I then secured it. Like a seatbelt, a password-protected strap was fastened around the handle. I then placed a motion sensor camera inside my bedroom door facing the hallway, just in case I wanted to go one step further. It's tiny, inconspicuous, and only activates when it senses movement. After everything, I needed to know that if Ashley invaded my personal space, I would have concrete evidence. I didn't want to live like I was in a spy thriller. No more speculating or approaching her, only to be met with denial and blank looks. Just the video footage's icy clarity. Was it excessive? From the outside, it could appear that way. You wouldn't understand, though, unless you've spent weeks watching your belongings go, facing someone directly, and being made to feel like the insane one for caring. People use the term dramatic as if it had any significance. I wasn't being theatrical, though. I was surviving, and I was tired of being used. After everything was resolved, Tyler sent me a message a few hours later. "I wanted to apologize," he said. I was hesitant at first. I reasoned that perhaps he had had time to reflect and had come to the conclusion that he had gone too far. Naturally, though, such was not the case. It was a quintessential non-apology. If I felt offended, he apologized. I wasn't insulted by him, simply said, "I seem to have misunderstood." He went on to say that because we're all attempting to support one another at the moment, I really ought to have just shared help from my position. He had only consumed meals that he had not paid for. Act arrogant and defend a mature woman's habit of stepping over boundaries. Without answering, I blocked him. Ashley's attitude then changed once again. She was leaning all the way into the performance, when previously she was subtly resentful. She completely stopped talking to me, which was the calmest she had been in weeks, to be honest. But rather than letting it go, she began using passive-aggressive notes as a way to express herself. Nor conversations, nor texts, sticky notes, dozens of them. She covered the kitchen with them. There are notes on the pantries inside, the cabinet doors, and the refrigerator. It was easy to determine who the target was, even though none of them were addressed to me specifically. Just one read. Communal work is necessary for communal life. According to another, sharing and being kind don't cost anything. She placed one squarely in the middle of the communal refrigerator door. Nevertheless, the one that truly struck a chord with me, the one that caused me to pause and chuckle because it was so far out of touch, was community. Shared places shouldn't encourage selfishness. We all eat together in life. Ashley even began posting passive-aggressive comments on the refrigerator, which made her pouting much worse. Life is a shared dish, much like community. Update 3. Since Ashley is no longer there, not because I made her go or set up a dramatic eviction scenario, this is probably the last update I will ever have to provide. At the end of the month, our lease was already scheduled to end. We had just been gone a few days. We were both quietly looking forward to the day when we wouldn't have to share a corridor or hear each other's breathing. I assumed that until the finish line, we would just have to put up with the uncomfortable quiet and unsaid tension. But on her way out, Ashley, being Ashley, couldn't help but do one more act of sheer arrogance. It took place on Tuesday. I was working, the same old procedure, and my phone gave me a ping, motion warning. I hadn't installed a very sensitive camera in my bedroom. In order to prevent it from going off with every change in light or shade, I had adjusted the settings. I realized something was going on when it alerted me. I thought it may be a false alarm or something little like the fan's curtain moving. So I accessed the live feed, but it wasn't. She was there. Ashley within my chamber. The video was really clear, not hazy, not warped. There she was in the picture. She was hunched over my little fridge, holding a package of my deli meat as if she was deciding whether to steal a few slices or the entire thing. Although she was moving rapidly, it wasn't fast enough to indicate terror. It was the speed of one who believed they had enough time to enter and exit covertly. All the while, her face was in view. The worst part is still to come. When I left my bedroom that morning, the door was locked. Evidently, she chose it poorly because as soon as I arrived home, I saw a small amount of damage around the latch. However, she had succeeded. It was my personal space, not the communal refrigerator that she invaded. There is no gray area. My loft, the bedroom, my groceries, my land. For me, it was it. This time, I didn't even bother to approach her. No more disputes in the hallway, no more standoffs in the kitchen with a cold shoulder. I brought the video directly to our landlord. I sent it an email with a brief justification. I had evidence that Ashley had broken into my locked room. I didn't dramatize or embellish things. I simply let the video do the talking, and it did. It turns out that breaking and entering is a major lease violation, even in shared rentals. The landlord made a snap decision. Ashley received an official warning to leave the property within 7 days. She didn't resist at all. After packing, she departed in 5 minutes. No notice, no farewell, no final altercation. Simply gone. The last time I saw her, Tyler was following her like a bewildered golden retriever as she disappeared down the hallway with a box of clothing. That seemed like the end of it to me, and it was. However, news spreads quickly, and I began to hear tidbits of information from my common acquaintances who were way too eager to share. Ashley went across town to live with her cousin. Evidently, she had fabricated the narrative once more, telling everyone that I was controlling and paranoid, that I had spied on her, and that I had unfairly ejected her. However, people do speak, and her cousin isn't a softie. Although I don't know her directly, I've heard that things are already going badly. Ashley has apparently been attempting to borrow food once more, but this time with someone who isn't scared to confront her out loud and directly. Even the half-eaten rotisserie chicken and almond milk caused a commotion, according to one source. So, new environment, same script. I'm doing well in the interim. Although saying it seems a little corny, it's true. It wasn't until it was gone that I realized how much of my energy had been focused on handling the ongoing tension. The flat felt like mine all of a sudden. I could discover exactly what I left in the refrigerator if I opened it. I didn't have to worry about whether my dinners would still be ready when I came home. When I went in the door, I didn't hear any strange messages attached to appliances, people using my dishes, or a murmur of contempt. I moved in with a new roommate about a week after Ashley departed. Sarah is her name. Since she works nights as a nurse, our schedules seldom ever coincide. She is courteous, tidy, and quiet. We had a brief discussion regarding personal versus communal belongings. Clearly define your bounds, and that was all. No games, no drama. Without my asking, she even labeled her refrigerator shelf and purchased her own set of Tupperware. Furthermore, she has never touched anything that wasn't in her possession. Now, everything is calm. I keep thinking about that term, calm. No chicken was taken, no leftovers that vanish. No unused cereal boxes pushed to the back of the cabinet, or unexplained protein bar bits. Just some quiet time and the knowledge that everything I've worked for, every penny I've spent on groceries, and every hour I've spent preparing meals is mine and mine alone. I'm not sure what Ashley says to people these days. She probably still sees me as the bad guy in the narrative. Still the heartless roommate who took things too seriously and refused to share. However, I no longer give a damn. People are free to believe anything they choose. To be honest, I didn't lose any sleep since I stood up for myself. I won it. So yes, final judgment. Not the jerk, just someone who at last took a stand and regained her peace and refrigerator. Story 3. Because no one ever provides anything, Aita refuses to host family dinners. I made the decision to discipline them. My family has always come together because of me. I've been in charge of organizing monthly family meals ever since I got my own house. I initially thought it was fantastic. Yes, I did. Making a large supper, arranging a lovely table, and watching everyone gather to eat, laugh, and tell tales was really fulfilling. It gave me the impression that I was establishing a unique custom that would bind us together. But as time went on, I began to see that I was the only one who was truly making an attempt. I didn't mind preparing everything at first. I like to cook, and it was satisfying to support my family. However, with time, what began as a labor of love evolved into something very else. There was never a single offer of anything. Not even a bag of ice, not a bottle of wine, and not a side dish. Not only that, but they never made an offer. They completely expected me to take care of everything without question, and if I ever needed assistance, like clockwork, the excuses came flooding in. Either I don't cook or I'm too busy. Otherwise, I would be unsure of what to pack. It began to seem more like I was operating a free diner than a family get-together. For me, last month was the tipping point. I had spent the entire day preparing a salad, homemade bread, roasted vegetables, mashed potatoes, and roast chicken. I knew my dad loved sweets, so I even made a pie for dessert. The only person I asked to bring something was my brother, who lives 20 minutes away and has no obligations outside of work. Only a little bread, that's all. I reasoned that it was the simplest thing to request. There is no cooking. Simply grab a loaf from the shop. He entered with nothing. He simply shrugged and said, "Oh, I forgot," when I inquired about the bread. "You're correct." He then placed a 6-pack of beer inside my refrigerator. He had, of course, brought his own beer. I simply gazed at him. It felt like a face slap. He remembered things easily enough for himself. However, he was content to eat when he could add even the smallest item to a meal. He didn't even consider it. That wasn't the only problem that night, although I wish I could say that. My cousin is constantly complaining about something. "You didn't make lasagna," I thought after taking one look at the spread. "That's my favorite, you know." "Thank you, but no. No appreciation for the hours I had spent cooking. Just disappointment that I hadn't tailored the meal specifically to him. My dad made a comment about how I could have added a few more side dishes, as if 5 wasn't enough. And at the end of the night, everyone just got up and left, leaving me with a mountain of dirty dishes and not a single offer to help that night. I sat at the kitchen table exhausted and frustrated, and decided I was done. I wasn't going to do this anymore. If my family wanted to have these dinners, they needed to contribute. The next day, I sent a message in our family group chat. I told them I wasn't hosting another dinner unless we did a potluck style. Everyone would be responsible for bringing a dish or at least contributing in some way. I didn't think it was an unreasonable request, but the backlash I got was immediate. My mom called me first, acting like I had just announced I was cutting ties with the family. "But you love hosting," she said. Like that somehow meant I was obligated to keep doing it under these conditions. My brother, the same one who couldn't even bring a loaf of bread, said, "That's so dramatic. It's just easier if one person handles it." Easy for him to say when he was practically doing nothing. My cousin, the one who moaned about lasagna, said I was spoiling our tradition. That's when it hit me. They didn't appreciate what I was accomplishing. They had just become used to it. They regarded it as a service, not an act of love. I adhered to my choice. When the next month rolled around, no one stood up to host. They all simply expected I would succumb and do it anyhow. When I didn't, my mom phoned again and said, "So, are we simply not doing family meals anymore?" I told her, "Not until individuals are willing to give." That was 2 months ago. No one has offered to host. Nobody has offered a substitute. The family meals simply ceased, and they may bear some of the blame for it since they would want to see the custom go away. Gives me all the information I require. So, am I the jerk for not allowing myself to be used any longer? Because, in my opinion, I've finally just established a barrier. One update. I assumed it was the end of family meals when the radio remained silent for 2 months. Nobody had come forward. Life simply went on without anyone bringing it up. To be honest, it seemed a little odd at first. It had seemed like something was missing when those monthly meals were absent since they had been so consistent. However, as the weeks went by, I began to relish my independence. No more racing around the kitchen, worrying about menus, or making last-minute trips to the grocery store because I missed an ingredient in my attempt to prepare everyone's favorite dish. It was quiet, and my family wasn't telling me if they were aware or concerned that we were no longer getting together. Then my dad phoned out of the blue. That was enough to get me to stop. He has never taken the initiative to make arrangements. My mom frequently arranges for him to see me when I'm the one making the initial contact. I sensed something was wrong when he asked if I wanted to go out to lunch. I nodded, but I prepared myself in case he called. The absence of dinners had now begun to irritate the family, and I was about to hear all about it. For the first part of lunch, things appeared normal as we met at this small burger joint that I used to frequent as a child. We discussed his job, a movie he recently saw, and the neighbor who had yet to cut his lawn despite the fact that it was nearly a jungle. He then casually added that my mom was furious, just as I was beginning to question whether I had completely misinterpreted the situation. My aunt had been bringing up the need for someone to take action while my brother had been whining. Naturally, though, nobody genuinely desired to take any action. I simply agreed, anticipating the guilt trip that was about to come. Usually, at this point, someone in the family would try to persuade me that I was being self-centered or that it was my responsibility to host, but my dad shocked me. He claimed to have warned them they were being sluggish while wiping ketchup off the side of his fingers, said they should quit being children and learn how to do it on their own if they wanted family meals to return. I blinked. My dad was the last person I thought would support me out of all of them. Typically, he avoids conflict, allows my mother manage social situations, and just cooperates with whatever maintains harmony. But here he was, clearly stating it. It wasn't my duty to make them stop taking me for granted. I woke up to complete turmoil in a group chat the following morning. Surprisingly, my brother was the first to offer to host. However, his idea of hosting was to announce that he would get takeout and that everyone could simply Venmo him their portion. He also sent a screenshot of a takeaway menu, which was meant to resolve the issue right now. My cousin had a breakdown. He spent a long time complaining that it wasn't the same, and that the whole purpose of family dinners was to eat home-cooked food. It was hilarious because he had never before done anything to help. In an attempt to defuse the situation, my mother suggested that they simply go to a restaurant. However, no one wanted to divide the bill equally, so it was shut down in record fast. Traditional. Subsequently, my aunt intervened, griping about the high cost of takeout, which inadvertently led to a heated dispute over who consumed more food during family get-togethers. Clearly forced into a position, my brother doubled down and claimed that no one else had offered to help. They could thus come up with a solution on their own if they didn't like his proposal. For the first time, I realized something had changed at that point. I wasn't being blamed. When I declined to host, they weren't upset with me. They were upset with one another since they couldn't agree on how to make it work. When it was my job, I watched as the messages continued to flood the group chat, gradually exploding over something they had all taken for granted. I didn't require an express apology, yet none was offered. The tone change says it all. They were struggling now that the duty was on them after they had finally learned how much work one had been doing and how much effort went into those dinners. It seemed like a victory. The second update appeared in the group chat just when I thought the family had given up. An invitation to my aunt's place for a family meal? I spent a considerable amount of time looking at the message, half believing that I was seeing things. My aunt had offered to host. The same aunt who previously said she was too busy to bring a store-bought salad. It must have been a trap, or, at the absolute least, a feeble attempt to make a point. I could just hear her smugly stating something along the lines of, "It's not that hard, or you just need to be organized." as if she hadn't enjoyed my years of hard work without doing anything. However, my curiosity overcame me, and I replied in the affirmative. It would be interesting to watch how this unfolded, if nothing else. I arrived promptly on the night of the meal, fully anticipating either a pot of barely seasoned spaghetti or a room filled with takeout containers. Perhaps a retailer purchased sides that were tossed onto a plate with the zeal of someone performing community service or a court mandate. However, I entered a chaotic situation. I could sense the tension in the air as soon as I entered. The mood was heated, the type that arises when things are already going wrong but nobody wants to acknowledge it just yet. Red-faced and agitated, my head was in the kitchen, agitating a pasta pot with far more force than is required. The whole home smelt like fire, as if the noodles had alerted her directly. As I looked over at the counter, I could see why a tray of what should have been roasted vegetables was sitting there, completely charred, the kind of blackened mess that, with a few more minutes in the oven, would have triggered a smoke alarm. My cousin, who seems to have decided to make bread from scratch, why? I don't know, was looming over the oven, looking very terrified. Every few seconds, he would slightly open the oven door to check on the bread, as though doing so would somehow undo whatever error he had previously done. It was safe to assume that things hadn't gone as planned, because his hands were covered in flour, and there were obvious clumps of dough adhered to his shirt. His jaw was clenched as he murmured something, and I nearly burst out laughing at how ridiculous it was. When I hosted, he was usually one of the loudest people complaining about the food not being to his exact liking. And now, here he was, fighting what I could only assume was a self-inflicted gluten-related nightmare. At the dining table, my mother was attempting to set it while also dissecting a sauce that resembled thick tomato paste more than anything eatable. She tentatively held the spoon while gazing at the pot's contents as if they might fix themselves with enough focus. She sighed, barely controlling her frustration as the spoon clinked against the side. She was not yet speaking, but it was obvious that she had already given up, as well as my brother. He arrived 20 minutes late, without anything, and without even looking at the catastrophe that was happening around him. He quickly grabbed a beer from the refrigerator. He opened the bottle, took a long sip, and leaned against the counter as if he were an invited guest at a restaurant rather than a purported participant in this meal. He didn't even glance at the table or ask if anyone needed assistance. The most amusing aspect? Although they didn't explicitly ask for assistance, they all continued to cast me sidelong glances and make brief pauses as if they were waiting for me to intervene, as if they expected me to take over the way I always did, roll up my sleeves, and sigh in resignation. I sensed the implicit expectation lingering in the atmosphere. I would feel sorry for them at any time, pick up a wooden spoon, and somehow keep this meal from going topsy-turvy. However, I didn't. I simply grinned, sat down, and enjoyed the performance. The meal was an event in and of itself. The spaghetti was clumped together in thick, overdone lumps that were simultaneously dry and mushy. Chewing was a bother because of the texture, as if every mouthful posed a challenge to oneself. Thick, pasty, and sharply acidic, the sauce had begun as an ambitious effort at something handmade. In uneven globs, it adhered to the noodles, leaving some bits naked and others drowning in it. My cousin's effort at baking bread was a total failure. It appeared sturdy enough, yet the knife hardly dented it when he tried to hack into it. After struggling with it for a whole minute, he eventually managed to tear off a piece, only to discover that the interior was still a little raw and strangely too thick. He chewed for much too long after taking one bite, then abruptly pushed his plate aside as if he had just lost a piece of his soul. The one meal that needed no expertise at all was the salad, which was essentially simply a bowl of basic lettuce with a bottle of dressing tacked on as an afterthought. Just dry greens in a dish, waiting for someone to really put together a complete salad themselves, no spice, no toppings. Every time someone inquired where anything was, my aunt, who was obviously worn out, would make irritated small sounds under her breath. My mother chewed with such determination that it seemed like she was trying to avoid talking at all. She was abnormally silent, concentrated, and far too hard on her plate, staring down at his failing bread with the haunting face of a man who had miscalculated every stage of the process. My cousin appeared to be going through an existential crisis. Ignorant as ever, my brother continued to eat as if nothing had happened, contentedly stuffing food into his mouth as though he weren't sitting in the middle of what could only be called an inadvertent comedy skit. The tension was evident. Every few minutes, someone would mumble how much work this had taken and groan. As she picked up her food, my aunt, who typically has the biggest voice at these events, hardly said anything. Every action showed the weariness. My cousin, who was still getting over his baking mishap, appeared truly shaken, as if he had just discovered a basic reality about the world that he wasn't prepared to face. Finally, my mother let out a long breath, set down her fork, and said, "I don't know how you did this every month." For them, that was the turning point. They had entered my home, sat down, and eaten without hesitation for years. The amount of time, effort, and preparation required to prepare those meals had never occurred to them. Setting the table, timing the dishes, food shopping, and ensuring that everyone's favorites were served were never concerns for them. They had just arrived, eaten, and gone, assuming that everything just occurred. However, they were seated around that table now. Though full, the stomach is not quite content. Finally, surrounded by the debris they had created, they realized. My aunt mumbled potluck while massaging her temples as if she had recently been in combat. Next time, it sounds excellent. In an instant, the dynamic changed. Update 3. Since the notorious incident at my aunt's house a few months ago, everything has been going well. At last, the family had begun to comprehend what I had been going through for years. The system of potluck was functioning. Everyone was making a contribution. Nobody was overburdened. I also relished family dinners for the first time in a long time. No more rushing to prepare meals. I no longer feel like a sous chef in my own house. No more rushing to get groceries at the last minute because someone forgot to bring what they said they would. It was pleasant, serene, and well-balanced. My brother was even taking part, despite the fact that he had been clueless and unprepared for years. Not flawlessly. He was still, of course, the master of bringing the bare minimum, such as a bag of chips that he had obviously picked up at a service station on the way over or a single bottle of soda. However, it needed work. Additionally, my family's effort was a huge success. I felt like I wasn't being taken advantage of for the first time in ages. My brother then committed the ultimate treachery. It began with a casual remark at lunch, similar to how someone might bring up a new film they were interested in seeing. At his house, he was throwing a Friendsgiving. I initially chuckled, assuming he was kidding. Once, while eagerly attending a meal, this man had neglected to bring a loaf of bread. A man who has never hosted anything more complex than a pizza and beer night in his life. A man who had honestly proposed ordering takeaway for a family get-together a few months earlier because it's simply more convenient. He wasn't kidding, though. In addition to hosting, he had meticulously prepared every aspect of the event. He had decorated his flat, given his pals dishes, and sent out a menu. To buy the ideal table arrangements, such as beautiful tiny centerpieces, he had visited many places. He even claimed to be brining a turkey for optimal taste. I gazed incredulously at the writing. He had pretended for years that helping with family dinners was an intolerable hardship. I've always received half-hearted or rule-based justifications whenever I've sought for even the slightest assistance. I overlooked it. However, he was suddenly the year's host alongside his pals, organizing the Thanksgiving feast, setting up the decor, and preparing the food. While roasting a turkey and sending out specific directions for side dishes, the same individual who earlier claimed that cooking was too much labor was suddenly doing it. I approached him about it, anticipating a weak excuse, perhaps that it was an isolated incident or that his buddies were providing more assistance than his family ever did. But no, he simply shrugged and added, "When it's for friends, it's different. That's finished." It wasn't even that I wanted him to become as excited about family dinners as he did about Friendsgiving. It has nothing to do with the actual effort. It concerned its meaning. He arrived with nothing but a hunger, whereas I had spent all those years arranging, cleaning, and cooking. He had not lacked the ability. He simply hadn't been concerned enough. He realized that he could achieve everything he had previously written off as too much labor the instant he had an audience that wasn't family. I thus took a minor action. I didn't have anything when I came up for his Friendsgiving. It was magnificent. His flat had the appearance of something from a lifestyle publication. The table was arranged flawlessly. The meal truly smelled amazing, and there were tiny candles glowing in ornamental vases. I could see he was pleased of the fact that he had gone all out. From the man who used to bring a six-pack of beer to Thanksgiving, he had changed into a person who was concerned with time, presentation, and environment. He gave me a hopeful glance as soon as I entered, looking for the food I was meant to deliver. He had given me the task of making mac and cheese, which I had been making for years at our family meals, which he had expressly asked me to make in the past, and which, even now, I knew he fully expected me to do. He scowled. "Where's the cheese and mac?" Innocently, I grinned. "Oh, I forgot." "You're correct." His expression was priceless. It was like to seeing each instance of his abuse of me strike him all at once. The glimmer of insight, the incredulity, the gradually emerging annoyance. As if he was having trouble comprehending what had just transpired, he opened his lips and then closed it again. My mother, who had been right behind him, gave a little start. There was no controversy for her. She was impressed, if nothing else. "That was frigid," she muttered, leaning slightly in. However, I noticed the grin. She made an effort to blend in. The dinner proceeded according to schedule, but the atmosphere had changed. He hurried to prepare a last-minute meal, assembling a box of Kraft mac and cheese that he obviously had saved for unexpected circumstances. But suddenly the vibe was different. The weight of what had already transpired hung between us each time he served me a plate. He was certain he understood. He had to experience what it's like to not put in the effort for once. I learnt my lesson. Both parties should put out effort. The fourth update. I assumed my brother would simply become irate and, as usual, find a way to dismiss it after that supper. However, something had changed this time. He didn't create a fuss, didn't try to defend himself, and didn't take advantage of the circumstances. He just accepted that someone had made him feel what I had been experiencing for years for the first time in his life. He sent me a note the next week. Well, that was brief. I was a jerk. "I'll really cook something the next time." What astonished me more was unclear to me. His acknowledgement, or the reality that he freely offered to do some of the labor, and did so. During the upcoming family meal, he brought cooked potatoes with him. Not simply baked ones thrown on a platter, but ones that have been appropriately seasoned with bacon and cheese. When my mother saw it, she almost dropped her fork. There was something strange about the air, yet everyone acted as if nothing unusual was occurring. That did not imply that he become an exceptional chef or the ideal host overnight. No, he still occasionally forgot stuff. Occasionally, he fetched meals from the supermarket rather than preparing it himself. He was making an effort, though. He was no longer the person who just arrived late and walked away, leaving the chaos in his wake. Most significantly, I was no longer expected to accomplish everything by everyone in the family. I eventually came to the realization that I had altered more than simply a family custom. I had altered my family's dynamics. I was no longer responsible for everything, the one who had to plan everything while everyone else just relished the outcome. Even though no one ever expressed regret openly, everyone who attended these dinners now realized that it was a team effort. I knew they understood, even if no one publicly acknowledged they had been mistaken for all those years. It was a little triumph, but it was unquestionably the most delightful of them.